In this episode of the Business of E-commerce, I talk with Kim Kohatsu on how to optimize your product listings. This is the Business of E-commerce, episode 78. Today's episode is sponsored by Drip. Drip is the world's first e-commerce CRM and a tool that I personally use for email marketing and automation. Now, if you're running an e-commerce store, you need to give Drip a try, and here's why. Drip offers one-click integrations for both Shopify and Magento. There's robust segmentation, personalization, and revenue dashboards to give you an overview of how your automation emails are performing. One of my favorite features of Drip is the Visual Workflow Builder. It gives you a super easy way to build out your automation rules visually and see the entire process. It lets you get started quickly, but also build very complex automation rules. It's powerful, but also easy to learn, unlike a lot of email tools that offer the same type of automation. To get a demo of Drip today, you can go head over to drip.com/BOE. That's drip.com/BOE. Now, onto the show. Welcome to the Business of E-commerce, the show that helps e-commerce retailers start, launch, and grow their e-commerce business. I'm your host, Charles Plesky, and I'm here today with Kim Kohatsu. Kim is the Director of Marketing for PickFu, where they help users perform their split tests. I've asked her on the show today to talk about how you can optimize your product listings. So hey Kim, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. I love the topic of split testing, so I'm excited to get into it. Um, I found out about PickFu a while back. Talked to a couple of the founders, and kind of we met through that. I guess real quick, what does PickFu do?
So, PickFu is essentially a surveying software that you can use for market research. But one of the things that we do differently, instead of just having you build a survey, we actually bring you a pool of respondents, and those respondents can match your target customer. So, not only are you asking a question, in this case about your e-commerce listings or about your e-commerce product, but we can, tailor that audience so that, if your product is geared towards women or people of a certain age, or if it's, a product for dog owners or a product for, health nuts or what have you, we can actually bring those people to you very quickly to answer your questions, and basically help you improve your listings and help you improve your products.
Gotcha. Yeah, I can see a lot of use cases for this. Well, actually, two in particular. One, when you have your own site, right? So if you're Shopify, Magento, whatever it is. But also if you're running on something like an Amazon, where that's totally like A/B testing over there is like a different world, right?
Right. Yeah. It's also really good if you are in a competitive environment where, you want to see how is my listing or how is my product faring against another product. So you can, take, for instance, your packaging and put it up against the competitors and say which one's more appealing, things like that. So I feel like it's a fast and very efficient way to do market research.
Yeah. Well, I love the topic too, just because it's one of those things you should be split testing, right? But if you're too small, then you have the problem of you don't have enough traffic. So every split test is essentially invalidated, right? Because if you say, well, I need at least, 1,000 users or whatever the number is, you're like, well, that'll take me, 2 months to get. Then maybe it's seasonal. So like it's going to go in the holiday season or it's going to go into summer or whatever it is. So that's going to blow up your test. Or then you have the other side of, okay, now I'm large. I have maybe this one product and we sell tons per day. Do I want to mess with that, right? Do I want to take my live listing and like blow that up just to run a test? So you have these kind of two sides of it where if you're too small, you can't do it. And if you're too big, you can't do it either. So you need to have something. So to get started, what do you kind of recommend? E-commerce
Well,
retailer.
yeah, one of the nice things about PickFu is that you can test things before they're live. So, in a traditional split test, you would have to have a working website, where, like you said, you'd have to bring a ton of traffic to it. So you usually have to pay for ads, so those are costs that add up. What's really nice about PickFu is before you go into production or before you, commit to a lot of inventory, you can actually test what product variations are, the most popular. So, as a for instance, if you're just thinking, okay, should I offer this color, this product in blue or in red, you can actually test that before you produce that. So, before your store even gets off the ground, you can be doing testing and seeing what is most appealing to people. There's all kinds of things that you can test, along the way. So, for instance, your product name is a big one. People, a lot of times if you name your product something, you might not realize that certain words that you use have associations that people bring to the product that, you may not want, that may not be what you're going for. So, an example I can think of is somebody was selling a, a mattress, and it was supposed to be a premium mattress, but at an affordable price. And they tested two names. One was budget bed, and one was ebb and flow. And people really reacted poorly to budget bed because they, almost all of them said, it just sounds cheap to me. And I think, those kinds of insights are things that you can only get really by putting, your idea in front of people. Once, you get a little further along in your process, then we can also help with things like your main product photo. That's a really good one. A lot of e-commerce sellers use to sort of see, okay, which image are you more likely to click on? And things like language, the language you use in your product description is another good one to test. All kinds of things like that, like I mentioned before, packaging, even down to the URL that you use. I think all of those things, it's really easy for any business owner to kind of get stuck in their own head and start to kind of, get tunnel vision because you're nose down in your project or your product, and you know it really well, and it's just really nice to get some outside perspective and just make sure that you're on the right track.
Yeah, it's funny. Right before the show started, we were talking about an ad I'm running, and we've been using the same ad for a while, same creative, same copy, and it definitely started thinking, is this really the best choice? Like, did testing, a while back, but it's probably time to revisit that and actually look and say, is this the best anymore?
Mm-hmm.
When
And
people,
then, like you said, if your ad is already performing pretty well, you don't necessarily want to damage that, right?
yeah,
So PickFu is a good way to sort of run these tests outside of the marketplace. So, outside of Amazon or outside of Google, what have you, you can kind of do these in isolation.
got it. Yeah. So what is
And the
some?
nice thing too is when you run, like, for instance, an ad test, sure, like you can compare, click-through rates, things like that. With PickFu, not only are people going to vote on your creative ideas, they're also going to give you a written comment, kind of explaining why they chose what they chose or what they saw. And those insights, I think, are really valuable, and you can't really get that through just a creative split test. What you start to see are kind of recurring words and themes that I think really open up a lot of possibilities.
Gotcha. So as far as structuring the test, or where do you even start, right? Let's say you have some products out there, you've never done much testing. You hear the thing all the time of, Google, well, with like a different color button and that changed the click through rate, this like fraction percent, but that turns out to be $1 billion a year. And people always get hung up on this thing of like, oh, we'll change the button color, and like, yeah, but you're not Google, right? You don't have that kind of traffic. Where are some things you would start that are like the big levers of, button color and fonts? Probably not going to do it, but
Right.
what are the top three things you would actually start testing?
Okay, so I think, for e-commerce especially, I would look at product name. I think that that's very important for branding, and for just, leaving a lasting impression with your customers. I would also test your main product photo because that's going to have a huge impact on your click-through rates, and just sort of the appeal that your product has, the impression that it leaves with customers. And then I would look very carefully at the language in your product description. So those would be my top three for an e-commerce listing. And then depending on, how your store is set up, whether, you're selling on a marketplace like Amazon or eBay, or if you've got your own store, then you can also, if you have your own store, you can also look at things like, how is my UI layout? Is my store, as friendly or as, trustworthy looking as it can be? And that's when you can really start to think about, okay, well, am I presenting, my product in the best way? Is my call to action button where it needs to be? Those sorts of things I think are also really important. But I think just, as just a basis level, I think just in isolation, looking at your name, your image, and your description are really important.
When you say test, right? So those things, I guess the first question, and you have the two different sides of this, would you go with your current title or photo, whatever it is, and make small tweaks? Or would you first start with saying, let's try, 10 wildly different photos, like that are completely had nothing to do with one another, and just and see which direction you start moving in? Like, where would you
Yeah,
start with that?
I think if you're starting from scratch, I think it's a good idea to kind of just be broad and look at different concepts altogether. So, for instance, if you are doing a product description test, one easy way to do that is, you know, hire like three different writers to approach it, and they're all going to do something a little bit different, and then maybe you put those up against your existing description, or not. Maybe you just want to kind of see what sticks. And what you'll find is that, like I said, you'll kind of get these sort of recurring themes and, recurring reactions that help you, kind of help guide the process. And I think once you're a little bit further down the road, you're confident that, okay, like direction B is kind of what people are most jibing with. Then you can see, okay, well, if I change the order of something, or if I format my headline a little bit differently, those small tweaks can kind of come down the road incrementally. But I think as a starting point, you do want to kind of just, throw caution to the wind and test wildly different things.
Well, that's a nice part too. If you're doing not a live test, I feel like there's kind of nothing to lose. And, maybe one picture is some picture you took on your iPhone, and maybe another one's a stock
Right.
photo, and just do some different, like, weird things just because you're not messing with your main product page. And that's kind of the other benefit of what you're talking about. Keep it in this kind of sandbox environment, right? Where users aren't seeing it. You're not going on your Amazon main product listing and changing that every 2 days and blowing it up. You're doing this kind of hidden test behind the scenes. So you can really put some weird pitches at a maybe one stock photo, maybe one you took, maybe one whatever photo, and just see what direction. So I love that one a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And what I always find is that there's always something that surprises me. I feel like, like I said, I think it's really easy to get, caught in your own head. And there's so many times where I'm sure that one thing is going to win, and then it doesn't, or it wasn't as popular as I thought, or a problem that I didn't even foresee comes up. And so I think, having that exposure, in front of 50, 100, 200 people is really incredible, because you start to see, oh, people aren't seeing what I'm seeing, or they're not bringing to the table what I thought they would bring. So, all of those things, I think, not only does it give you confidence, it really does, I think, open your eyes to things that you might not have considered.
Yeah, it's one of those things too where even, and I've fell victim to this too, you kind of, let's say you do all the testing and you find something you're like, I am totally satisfied. This is great. It's working. And then you kind of just, you get a little comfortable, right? And 6, 8 months go by and you've just been running it. And then you realize like things have changed. The market's changed. Maybe even just the season's changed. And then you actually go back and you revisit this again and realize like, this is not good at all. Like I thought this was like the best one. And you realize it's really not the best. It's like far from that. And it's shocking just over time. It just starts drifting. So whatever is good today doesn't necessarily mean let's just stick with that and run with that. You need to almost do this. It needs to be like this like hygiene thing of you constantly need to get in this mode of let's keep trying and let's just see, did the market change? Did our positioning change or whatever it is? Something might have changed outside of your control you can't see, and it's just
That's
important to
right.
see, to understand
And
that.
that's another good, instance too, where you can run your listing against a competitor listing and see what's going on, right? I mean, you can, that's something that you
Ah, that's a
can't
good.
do in a
Yeah,
live test, right?
that's a
So,
good one.
so I think that that's another clever use of PickFu as well, just to sort of see, okay, well, what's going on in this store that's not going on in mine, and get a sense of where you might want to head from there.
Oh, so you're trying to say, so you would say take a, basically you could take your product page and an exact competitor page and maybe remove some logos and just put them both in front of people in this sandbox environment, right? Where no one else knows you're doing this outside of this test and it's very controlled, and just see like, okay, more people just go to my competitor. And that tells
Yeah,
you a ton right there.
yeah,
Or you might go the opposite
exactly.
direction and say, wow, more people go to my page and my competitor doesn't actually know what they're doing. And, you know, maybe that's a happy surprise, right?
Right, exactly.
All right. What kind of test size are we talking to make it valid? Because I think this is what people were talking about. This happens all the time where you have 30 people go and you kind of just say, oh, this one. But you realize
Right.
it's not a legit sample set.
Right. So I think it's a different threshold when you are surveying versus running a live test. Because again, I think when you run a live test, your customers aren't, they don't realize that there's any other variation out there, right? They're just doing what they do. And so I think, in order to have confidence in that, you need to have a higher threshold. With surveying, the way that we do it at PickFu is the minimum survey would be 50 people. So, I think if that were to be, like a PPC split test, like, I wouldn't trust just 50 clicks. But when it comes to 50 people giving you written responses, I think that at least gives you a good foundation or a good sort of compass to guide your decisions. You can go up to 100, 200, even 500 people using PickFu. So, if you decide that your sample size wasn't big enough, you can always make it bigger. Um, and like I said, you can also tailor the audience. So instead of just testing whoever, you can for instance test only a group of Amazon Prime members, or you could test only with people who are homeowners, or you could test only with people who are some combination of things, right? So they are college graduates between the age of 25 and 34, and they drive a car, or something along those lines. So you really can tailor it to your needs. I wouldn't say that there's necessarily, I feel like every test is a little bit different. And sometimes I do think, certain things call for a larger audience size. But at least with PickFu, I would say, start with 50, see what that gives you, kind of test out the waters. And then, like I said, you can always grow that audience if you feel you need more input.
I guess the nice part there too is you're running the tests in this controlled, like simultaneous environment, right? Where it's not outside factors. We've done things with there's a promotion running or a certain campaign. There's traffic coming in from a source that will stop at some point. It's a one time hit. So any test we're running at that point, it kind of skews and pretty much invalidates the results of you know anything that if you run two different variations at different times, it can easily invalidate the results. First, what you're talking about is running them side by side, right?
That's right. Yeah. So our audience will see all of the options laid out before them, and they will be able to say, okay, this one works better for me than this one. With PickFu, you can test up to 8 options, or you can just test one. So, for instance, if you just want to ask an open ended question, that's another interesting way to get feedback. But in most of our tests, you would take 2 or 3 options and test them against each other. And like I said, all of the respondents see all of the options. And so they're in a little bit of a different mindset, but I think it also helps you really pinpoint what is different about each one and what about those differences are working with the people that you're showing it to.
Got it. What you mentioned asking questions, right? Like actually getting
Hmm.
survey data back. What are some helpful
Yeah.
questions you would ask on, let's say you're showing a product page? Like, what do you actually want to ask people? Because if you asking questions, right, you can frame it the wrong way and you can get the answer that you want, and that's makes you feel good, but totally useless. So how do you ask questions to actually get the answer you need and not just the answer you want?
That's a great question. So obviously it's going to come down to
It's
what
it's
it
a great
is you're
question because
trying to find.
it's a great
Yeah.
question because I like to ask questions where I get the answer that I want. But so I want to know, how do I get answers that I need, not the answers I want. So
Right. Well, I think the first thing is use very plain, objective language. So, instead of saying, for instance, how much do you like this thing? That's a positive biased question, right? Instead, you would ask, which of these is most appealing to you, or something similar. Or, the other thing you could really probe in a certain direction. So, for instance, if you've got just like say a video that you created, and you've only got one, you don't have anything to compare it to. Maybe you ask a question like, "How clear is this video?" Or, are you left wondering anything about this product after seeing this video? So I think the most important thing is to be as objective as possible. Really think through the what it is that you're trying to find out. I also think what's really helpful is you can look through. We've got something called a public poll gallery where you can look at what other people have done. And I think that that's very helpful just to sort of see, okay, well, like, this test looked pretty good, that's kind of a clever question or what have you. And then in addition to that, every Wednesday on our blog, we feature a poll where we actually give analysis. And so you can look at previous polls and sort of hear our feedback on what to take away from this poll, maybe how it might have been better. And so that's a really good way to learn really how to poll, because I do think that the more that you do it, the better you get at it. So, when I came on to PickFu 3 years ago and I was just sort of playing around with the product, I definitely made some mistakes that I am aware of now. For instance, my options maybe weren't consistent. So, I wasn't only testing, for instance, the design parameter because I had different copy on each design or something like that. So there are definitely ways that you can improve your tests. And I think at the heart of it, though, it's almost like the plainer you can make it, the better. Like, don't try to get too clever with it. I think is really the crux of what I would advise.
yeah, I was on Twitter the other day, and Patrick Campbell, the founder of Profitwell, um, asked a question I thought was genius and probably relevant here. If he just said, "Hey everyone, what do you think Profitwell does?" And this is in the group of SaaS founders. A lot of people have heard. Everyone knows what Profitwell is. I had an opinion of what I thought it did, and kind of just going through this thread of realizing, okay, I don't even think I actually know the right thing, and no one else in this thread seems to know the right thing. So just asking this like extremely open-ended question of, what do you even think this is? Like, what do you think this product is? What do you think it does? You get the responses, which is eye-opening of, wow, all people that even use the product and interact and know Patrick and interact with the company and have heard him spoke still have no idea what it actually is, or
Yeah,
have very different ideas, I guess. So
right.
everyone
Or
seems
they
to think they know.
articulate it in a certain way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, I guess that's the other thing too. Then you start to hear, when you do the surveying, which is interesting, you hear how people describe what it is. So it's not just which ones you like better, but what words you use to describe what it is, right? So just asking, hey, you know, here's two air mattresses, right? Something like that. Just hearing how they describe those products, that gives you a sense of, oh, what words are my customers using? Not just, right? So then you can almost start building the copy based on that when you try your next test, on what words do they use? And then we try to push those back at them.
Exactly. Yes. And I'm a copywriter by trade, and I think that those things are very insightful. The kind of descriptors, the language that people respond to, and also the language that they don't respond to. So, certain words are just turnoffs. And I think, a lot of times too, especially when it comes down to brand names and product names, I found that there are certain very good uses for misspellings or hard to pronounce words. And then there's some very bad ones where people are just turned off. If they, a lot of times I'll see tests where it's like, I don't know how to pronounce that, so I wouldn't buy it. Or, I don't like it as much because I don't know how to say that. So I think, especially when it comes to naming, pronounceability, spelling, those are all things that can either work for you or against you. And you may be surprised at what you find.
Yeah, on the Spark shipping on our main site, I think at one point it said that we did inventory updates auto magically. I thought it was a clever play on words. You don't know how many support requests we got saying there's a misspelling your site. I'm like, oh, I thought it was clever. No one else thought it was clever, it turns out. So things like that you do, and you think, yeah, it's going to be this like clever misspelling kind of word I made up, and a lot of people are like, that's not a real word. You're like, oh, okay. I know, I get it, but yeah. So certain things just turn people off, and you don't realize it. And that was one of those examples. This was like the initial design. There was no testing. It just kind of went out, and until people actually started literally emailing, pointing out a word they didn't like in the copy, I'm like, okay, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things. If you put that in front of people and you kind of split test that, you'd probably hear that a lot sooner.
That's right.
I'm
And,
guessing.
it again, it kind of gets you out of that tunnel vision. It gets you out of your own head, brings a fresh perspective that you wouldn't otherwise get.
Yeah, I like that. And then how are people doing this with Amazon? Because I feel like that's one of the tougher places, right? Because you don't really have control of the listing. So,
Right.
like, when you say split testing in that world, what are people actually doing there to split test?
So a lot of our Amazon split tests are based around images. That is probably the biggest driver of, what Amazon sellers want to test because, that image is going to profoundly affect your click-through rates, right? Um, and a lot of times you might have, eight product photos and, you just pick the one that you liked the best or maybe the one that uploaded the fastest or whatever. Maybe you didn't put that much thought into it, but really if you ask people which image are you more likely to click on or which image is the most appealing to you, you'll be surprised at what they say. So sometimes people want to see that kind of product by itself against a white background, but other times it's more about the in-use kind of product that kind of gives people a better understanding of what it is they're looking at. We found with images too, there's other kinds of insights that you can get. So for instance, an e-commerce seller was running an image poll on a fitness product. And it was like some sort of exercise band where one photo showed a woman using the band, and the product was more prominent. And then another photo kind of had, the same female, but it was more skin. So it was more sexy. It was, it was sort of just more, like sex appeal. And what was interesting was when you looked at the demographic breakdown of, what people responded to, the men in the respondent pool were like, yeah, give me the sexy photo, right? But the women were quite turned off by it. And what was interesting was this product, at least from what I could tell, just looking at the picture, looked like it was geared to women. So, in that way, it's like you really want to think about, okay, who is your customer and what did they respond to versus what you might respond to? Or, just thinking about who it's for and what you're trying to convey with your images, right? So maybe your product is high end. So, which looks more luxurious or which looks more well made or expensive or, those sorts of things, I think, too, give you insight into what images work best. Another thing I've seen with images is, a lot of products are bundles or they have a lot of component parts. And just how you display all those component parts can also really affect how people feel about, they want to know what they're getting. And so just the way that you might shoot everything in that bundle can have an effect on how people feel about it. So, there's definitely a lot of ways to test your images. And I would say, on Amazon, that's probably are what we see as the biggest use, but there's other uses too. So if you're doing an FBA product, that you've created, again, product names are very important, right? You want to stand out in some way, and your product title is usually right, a product name, some original product name, and then some product descriptors. And all of the sort of optimization tools out there are going to give you insights into like keywords you can use and things like that. But when it comes to that product name, what people like will remember and what they're going to recommend to their friends, I mean, those are things you really want to test with people. And then again, the descriptions that you use. So we had a test that I can think of with some descriptive language where it was, the length of the two descriptions were pretty similar. But what this person did in one was he bulleted all of the features, and he kind of gave like an introduction to the bullet in a way. So there was sort of like it was for a spherical ice tray. So if you think about, if you're drinking whiskey on the rocks and you just want one big ice cube, right? And so, one bullet point would just start off perfect for the whiskey drinker, and then it would kind of go into more detail. And what people responded to was they were like, I love that I could just kind of scan it really quickly. And so that was actually an Amazon description that you can see live now. And it's interesting, that product has sold so well. It's actually one of those Amazon Choice products. So that was just really great to see. Just something that is doing really great, but still, like you said, continually optimizing and making sure that the listing is up to snuff.
Well, when you start talking about products that are actually already doing well, just moving it from a 6 to a 7% whatever conversion rate, that's going to move the needle big time, right? So
Exactly.
once you're at that level, you almost like need to be testing, just because any small percentage jump, it's going to move the needle much larger than when you're starting off. Goal one of just creating the product page is just, let's just get some image up there. I don't even like, one, I don't know what it is, the stock photo, whatever it is, just you get something up there. But then after you start getting traction, that's when you need to start kind of going back and revisiting some of these early assumptions.
Exactly. Yep.
How do you combat people? Because I feel like this would happen a lot in surveys. Like just giving you like the nice feedback instead of giving you the true feedback. Is that ever an issue where, well, I feel like if I ask someone like, hey, do you like the shirt? If I'm walking down the street, no one's going to say, it's awful. Like, you tend not to get that. Is that something in a survey you worry about? People just like, or is it the internet and people just like brutally honest with you and they hate your shirt?
I do think that our survey respondents do tend to be thoughtful, in that, sometimes they will be brutally honest, but I think that you're more likely to get sort of that quote unquote nice feedback if you just ask like your family and immediate friends, right? If you're just asking your coworkers or, your buddy or, the person down the street, they're looking you in the face. They have some kind of relationship with you. So they are going to try to spare your feelings. I think that our respondents tend to be honest and thoughtful. And, the other concern that a lot of people have is it's the internet. How do I know they're going to take my questions seriously? How am I, I don't want to get a bunch of, spammy crap answers. And what we've done at PickFu is we've put a lot of quality controls in place to weed that out. So we have done a lot of things on the back end to make sure that people are who they say they are, that they take your questions seriously, and we won't let certain responses go if we've done a lot of kind of machine learning. If our AI doesn't think that the response is detailed enough, for instance, it won't go through. But then on the front end of that, if you as a person running a poll get your responses back and you really think that certain responses were not helpful or weren't serious, you can flag those responses, and we can take actions on our side from there, such as either refunding for that response, or banning that person from our system. There's all kinds of ways that we have really worked to get a very good community of people coming to your poll and answering it seriously.
Yeah, I know the last thing you want me to do any sort of survey or form is you make the comment box required, and you get just like the period and then submit. And you just get a bunch of responses like a period, and you're like, okay, should have made that field required. I get it. I get what you're trying to say. So yeah, no one wants that. Cool. Any kind of other surprises or takeaways or things that, because I feel like this is one thing that's full of surprises. Any kind of last surprises that you kind of didn't know 3 years ago, and you saw enough surveys now where you're like, oh wow, I'm now so much wiser, and I would do this so much differently now.
Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the things that is really useful, that I think that a lot of sellers don't think about, is that you can test before you do anything. So idea validation is a really nice use case for PickFu, where before you even launch a product, I think that that's a really good thing to do, is just, hey, does anybody need this? Or would you pay X dollars for this, or whatever. I think that is a great way to get feedback before you even launch. And I would say that that is probably one of the most useful but underutilized uses for a service like PickFu.
Yeah, it's a good one, because you hear of a lot of folks that that are more established. They have an email list, and then it's easy to get that kind of early advice, right? Where, not easy, but let's say you have 50,000 people, and you can just email them and say, hey, what do you think of this new idea? You're gonna get some responses. A little different. They're skewed. They already know your brand. Maybe same thing. They're not, it's not, you're not asking your mother, hey, how do you like this shirt? So it's not that level of warmth, but they're a little more warm with the brand. So they're not going to give you brutally honest feedback, but at least you can get feedback. But if you're small, you don't have that kind of access. So
Yeah.
you don't have like just a list. You can just say, hey, I'm launching this new X. And before I get the container delivered, what do you think?
Well, and it's interesting too, because those kinds of tests where you do have a list, I mean, that's still useful feedback. I mean, right? You want to satisfy the people that are already in your orbit, right? I mean, that's a good thing. But it's also important to expand that orbit, right? So we had an author, for instance, who had a Facebook fan group. And she did a test where, she wanted to see, if she redesigned the covers of her books, what people would say. And interestingly, her Facebook fan group responded very similarly to the PickFu audience. And so what you'll find is, a lot of times, our audience can be predictive of what you might see in a live test or with your own customers. But also, I think it's interesting to sort of, make sure that, like I said, you're satisfying both sides. You want your existing customers to still feel like this is part of your brand, that this is a useful thing for them. But you also want to appeal to people who aren't those customers, right? So I think both kinds of tests can be valuable, and I think there's a place for both of them. But like you said, if you don't already have that list, it's really difficult to in a short amount of time and with not that much money, to get that feedback. And that's kind of why a lot of times we proceed just based off of decisions we make with our gut, or, we don't really bother with those things because it doesn't seem like it's feasible. And if you use a surveying software like PickFu, it really is. It really is easy to, get that feedback, improve your product before, you go into production, before, you sign off on all of the final designs and what have you, because you've already got confidence in the direction that you're going in.
Okay, awesome. So if people want to check out PickFu, learn more about you, where can they do so?
Sure. So pickfu.com, and then specifically for e-commerce, you can do /e-commerce. We are also on all the social medias. And then, like I said, check out our blog. We've got some really nice featured polls that you can take a look at, and sort of see the analysis. You can look at other polls that people have run and try it out for yourself.
Awesome. All right. I think that was super helpful. So thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.